Hello everyone and welcome to a new video from Your Overwatch. I'm Eddie the Chump and today we're going to be talking about Zarya. Now we've said a few times that Zarya can be a little bit overrated and we stick to our guns on that issue. There's certainly maps where you don't want to play her, but a lot of the time, at least in ranked matchmaking, she's actually just rated. It really comes down to two things. One is what she does for Rein, as in enable him to actually play the game in this era of stuns and disables, and two, make him playable in more situations than you might argue you should do if everything was optimized. Rein Zarya is easier to be effective with than the things it takes to counter them. Players are generally more comfortable with how this synergy works than the alternatives. So with all that being said, we're going to be looking at a top tier Zarya, the Houston Outlaws off-tank player Spree, to see how he gets the most out of her in matchmaking. Like everything in Overwatch, Zarya is not as simple as she first seems, so we'll start by looking at basic principles before moving on to more advanced nuances of Spree's play to get you building grav quicker than it takes to like this video. Context. So the first section is about where Spree chooses to play Zarya. Well, she's naturally very good on any map where the enemies are forced by the geometry into her mid-range brawling danger zone. Chokes, long narrow lanes that payloads often travel through, maps with this sort of dynamic are Spree's playgrounds. Think King's Row, Hanamura, Rialto, or Eichenwald first and third points. If it's too open, almost without exception, Spree swaps to D.Va or outright plays her from the start. There is a tiny bit of leeway to this, especially if his main tank has elected to play Rein regardless of whatever map they're on. Because Spree plays at such a high level, Lucio is a lot more prevalent than at lower ranks, which means that Brawl can often get to places you wouldn't expect before they take too much damage and make it work. That's probably not the case for most of us, so you have to be aware of that fact. Another thing you need to have ingrained in your mind is who Zarya is as a hero. She's a classic off-tank in the respect that she has the tools to both attack and defend, and actually the decision about when to do which one is what really defines a good Zarya player. I can't stress this enough. Everything that's good about Spree's Zarya stems from how he manages her most important cooldowns, so that's what we're going to be covering next. Bubble management is a hugely complex subject, and that's because there's so many ways to use her barrier toolset. They can save teammates from focus, enable their offense, shield a fragile ult like Barrage or High Noon, block crowd control for a short period of time, remove Ana's anti-nade debuff. The list goes on, while hopefully building you all the charge you need to dominate. With such a deep well of potential big plays to choose from, the hard part then is selecting the right one at the right time. So let's talk basics. Building charge. The first thing I looked for in Spree's play was, how does he use the bubbles to build and maintain his charge? The answer is, he's really good at understanding the inherent footsie game of when the opponent will want to do damage. Spree will often walk beyond his main tank's shield in an aggro posture at the start of a poke phase, take some space, forcing his opponents to try and damage him, then self-bubble before retreating and getting his Rein to swing forwards with his shield down and bubble him on contact. This is a kind of dovetailing that's quite common at the higher ranks, a kind of tank dance, if you will. It's a form of baiting, but it's also forcing the issue by making the opponents have to react to you. You'd be amazed at how many times he has 60 charge before anything has really happened. This is especially true of the second bubble onto his Rein. Rein's cleave damage is such a threat, particularly if it's also being sped up by a Lucio, that an enemy team cannot leave it uncontested. A bubble then, as Rein is swinging away building Earth Shatter, is almost certain to build up charge. There are easy shortcuts too. An enemy fire strike can be read and reacted to quite straightforwardly, and once you start to get above 50 charge, then you can really start to get stuff done, including building your grabs, but more on that later. So with how Spree often gets his initial charge covered, what about the plays that help him sustain his charge over time? Well, there's a rhythm to Zarya that Spree is really good at, and this is where what you can do with projected barrier in particular really starts to come into its own. Defensive barriers. For this section I'll be showing how Spree makes huge plays to save a teammate once a fight has broken into mid-fight trading. Now there's all sorts of nasty things in this meta that can kill someone very quickly. Rein pins, Doom combos, Genji ults, Brig stuns, etc. And it's these second and third bubbles that really make the difference. You'll notice from the clips that there's a mix of frontline saves and backline saves, and that's really the dilemma a Zarya faces. The fact is, you won't be able to save everything, but wherever you decide to put that barrier has to be getting value. How Spree decides which one to favour largely depends on what his opponents are playing against him. When his enemies are playing, say, Doom or Genji or Hammond, Spree is on the lookout for that backline clutch bubble, because if you can use it to save a support or a DPS in a duel, your opponents will be at a serious resource disadvantage. They'll have committed their cooldowns but not got the reward, very often leaving them exposed exposed afterwards. Doom is particularly vulnerable to this, and a sweetly timed Zarya bubble is one of the best defenses against his direct playstyle. Doom doesn't really have a poke game to speak of, so when playing against him you need to keep in mind that at some point he will come in. If you can manage your cooldowns with some restraint to have a bubble on deck, you can seriously blunt his effectiveness. If he's not going in and getting kills, he's doing virtually nothing. A note about the restraint point. Sometimes it's a good idea not to obsess about playing for maximum charge all the time, but instead play for the impact of a bubble save. Being at 0 charge is not good, obviously, but once you start to get up to like 60 charge, it can be a case of diminishing returns. The beam at max does 190 damage per second. At like 50, it's doing around 140. That's still a lot. If you use your bubbles too hastily in the name of maximum charge, your enemies will be able to read that and exploit it, making plays when they know you're on cooldown. Sometimes it's better to take the hit on your beam's DPS than suddenly having no healer. However, if your opponents are running something with an incredible amount of frontline pressure, like 3 tank 3 support, you'll very likely have to use it just to keep your Rhine alive, so that restraint might not even come into relevance. It's a deeply contextual decision, and it's down to you to make the right call. Offensive barriers. There are of course uses for projected barrier that aren't about defense, but are centered around enabling someone else's playmaking. Let's talk about Rhine again. Good Rhines don't pin very often, only in rare circumstances and usually at shorter ranges. The reason for that is when Rhine pins, he's actually incredibly vulnerable. Sleep darts, pin trades to other Rhines, Doomfists and Briggs, etc. An ill-advised pin is equivalent to a throw button. Well, an offensive bubble on a pinning Rhine enables him to be safer and more dangerous at the same time. He can't be CC'd or anti-naded. A bubble on Rhine trying to make a play liberates him from the shackles of everything in the game that wants to stop him doing that, which I don't know if you've noticed is quite a lot. That principle extends to other heroes who also want to make big plays. Doom coming in at you is bad enough, but a bubbled one so you can't sleep him or stun him, terrifying. Genji too can really benefit from a bubble in a duel. In fact, any DPS that wants to commit to secure a kill is much more dangerous when bubbled. It's 2 seconds of opportunity for a play that can't be countered outside of breaking the bubble, but by that point if you've timed it well enough, like Spree does often, it's already over. At higher ranks this is made a bit easy because generally speaking the calls and game knowledge are better, so your teammates will directly ask for a bubble to try and go and do something cool. But the underlying skill of plays like this is in your reading of the game, and there are perhaps no better examples of that than when Spree uses an offensive bubble to protect a value ultimate. The clips are mainly with a Genji blade, but the principle is applicable to many others. A Pharah barrage is one that immediately springs to mind, as I said earlier. What's worse than a nano Genji blade coming at you? A Zarya bubbled nano Genji blade. If the enemy team comp has enough CC, a blade can be dealt with. Sleep dart, Brig stun, McCree flashbang, and that can be all she wrote. Not so with a bubble. For the 2 seconds it takes to wear off, Genji can have his way with teams, and Spree very regularly takes advantage of this, leaving his opponents with no room to do anything other than just die and reset. Offensive bubble use is all about playmaking, and they don't come much bigger than that. Damage and grav building. So now we've covered how Spree builds all that fat charge, protects and enables his teammates. What does he then do with all that latent firepower? Well, it's time to start doing damage and building gravs, and they are, as everyone knows, interlinked. Let's first talk about Zarya's primary fire beam. It is much more ammo efficient than the right click projectile. Problem is, at Spree's level, enemies don't just let you beam them into oblivion, they're much better at not giving him the opportunity. They know it goes through defense matrix and Genji reflect and avoid it wherever possible. He does use it when he can, obviously, and there's a level of tracking skill that he displays that shouldn't be written off, but he makes excellent use of the right click whenever possible. This is a cornerstone of fast grav building, as each hit can do up to 90 damage in a 2 meter radius, and chunky hits can quickly add like 5% to Zarya's ultimate meter. That's a lot for an ult that passively charges quite slowly. What's even better is the way enemies regard her projectile. They quite often don't go out of their way to avoid it, expecting their healers to just top them up afterwards. People see it as spam damage, inconsequential to a certain extent. If you've ever wondered why an enemy Zarya has grav every fight, it's largely to do with this non-avoidance of a right click. Spree charges grav very quickly, and it's mostly done through this method. New graviton. Right, so now that you're building gravs that much quicker, what has changed in how a pro like Spree uses it since its radius nerf? Well, I'm not going to say that big grav combos aren't still a feature in his play, because they are, especially where the map geometry funnels people into a space where he can get a fat grav because the enemy are also close together. What DPS he has on his team also affects what kind of gravs he goes for. If there's a Hanzo present, then sure, grav combos are absolutely still a thing. But but Spree will also use grav in a kind of tempo way, and by that I mean he'll quite often grav a few key targets when the opportunity presents itself. Think of this like a mini counter engage. He'll grav the backline when a tank moves away from them, like a Mei wall but in reverse. A wall separates the tank for focus. These kinds of tempo gravs separate the team instead. The main thread running through all of this is grav for a specific purpose, not for greed. If you kill all the supports and a DPS in a grav, they still lose the fight. Wiping a whole team single-handedly isn't the only way to win, especially if your opponents are playing a comp that likes to split. If you're playing too greedy with your ult, waiting for them to all bunch up, that might never happen and you're missing out on fight-winning value. Again, it's all about context and decision-making. Where is the impact play going to happen? And that's about it for today's Spree guide. I think I've given you quite a lot of information to try and digest. I really hope you've been able to absorb some of the things that make him great. Zarya is very common right now in quite a generic way, but her true power comes from being able to make crucial plays at the right time. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to leave a rating. If you never want to miss another video of ours again, please click the bell icon next to the subscribe button on our channel to join the notification squad. You'll be in great company. And finally, please follow the Your Overwatch Twitter. It's where you can find updates about new videos and other cool stuff. I've been Eddie the Chump, and until next time,